بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Before we commence with the book, it is essential to first discuss about the author. I purposefully used the word essential because we will inshallah be deriving benefit from this book. It cannot be that we take benefit from a book whilst we do not even know who wrote the book. Sheikh Makki ibn Abi Talib al-Qayrawani rahimahullah, he mentions in the introduction of his book Al-Kashfu an Wujuh al-Qira'at al-Sab' فبادرت إلى تأليفه ونظمه ليكون باقيا على مرور الزمان وانقراض الأيام حرصا مني على بقاء أجره وجزيل ثوابه. أسأل الله أن ينفع به مؤلفه والمقتبس العلم منه، فواجب على كل ذي مروة وديانة أفاد من كتابنا هذا فائدة أو اقتبس منه علما أو تبين له به معنى مشكل أو علم منه علما لم يكن يعلمه أن يترحم على مؤلفه، ومن أتعب سره وبدنه في نظمه واستخراج علله واستنباط فوائده، وأن يستغفر لمظهر فوائده ومشهر نوادره وعلومه. فما علمت أن لشغلي وتعبي بتأليف هذا الكتاب وأشباهه فائدة أعظم من أن يترحم علي من أجله مترحم، أو يستغفر لي عند قراءته مستغفر، أو يذكرني بخير ذاكر. فرحم الله من بادر إلى ما رغبته فيه من ذكري بالخير والترحم علي والاستغفار لي. The summary of this is, he mentions that he spent lots of time researching and compiling this book just so that he can enjoy the eternal rewards. So he makes dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala benefits him as the author, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also benefits the reader. He then mentions that it is essential for any person who has some morals and integrity that if he derives any benefit from the book, then he should pray for the one who sacrificed all his time and strength in bringing the book to the fore. So he mentions that they should seek forgiveness on his behalf, and he actually says that there is no greater benefit for his hard work except that people should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive him, and they should at least speak good about him. So he mentions this in Al-Kashfu an Wujuh al-Qira'at al-Sab'. It's on page 4. But if you take into consideration the introduction, then it is on page 62. Looking at the great efforts which the author put in making this book successful, at bare minimum, we should know a little bit about him. And then with that also we can get a brief overview on the dynamics and the customs in his time that will assist us in understanding his mindset and his background, which will then give clarity on how he chose certain views. Also, bearing in mind that he was a specialist in this field, we can study his qualities and habits, and then we can try to emulate him. Someone once asked me regarding the ruling of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. So whilst researching it, and I also went for a few courses to study it, I found that it is all about modeling the skills of exceptional people. Do what they did, you will become what they became. So for us, these are our role models, and we learn about them so that we can emulate them. Being such an expert in the science of Ḥadīth, Allama ibn Hajar rahimahullah is extremely well known. Because of his popularity, libraries are filled with biographies about him. So it is rather easy to gain information on him. In fact, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he wrote a book on his own life. and after him many others also wrote about him. One of his closest and most loyal students, Allama Shamsuddin al-Sakhawi rahimahullah, he wrote a book on the life of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, and the title of this book is Al-Jawahir wa-Durar fi Tarjimati Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Hajar. Al-Jawahir wa-Durar fi Tarjimati Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Hajar. Although he was still quite young when the author passed away, he was around 22, he had enjoyed a very close relationship with Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. During his relationship with the author, when he was still with him, then he witnessed a lot and he spent lots of time with Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. He spent and he stayed so close to Ibn Hajar rahimahullah that during the years that he was with him, he did not even travel. He never went to any other place. He just stayed all the time with Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. Allama Sakhawi rahimahullah would assist the author in his research. So Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah also confided in him and disclosed much of his personal information to the special student of his. Many times Allama Sakhawi rahimahullah also confirmed certain details directly with Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. And therefore I thought that it is best for us to confine ourselves to narrating the author's life from this book of Allama Sakhawi rahimahullah, Al-Jawahir wa-Durar fi Tarjumati Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Hajar. Otherwise, if you're going to go through all these different books, then we will end up having 50 lessons just on the life of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. And our objective here is not to go through the life of the author, rather it is to study the book of the author. If you have the book Al-Jawahir wa-Durar, then you can go through it whilst we are discussing about him. And inshallah, when we present the notes, then we will also give a link so that you can access the book through a PDF. And if you are listening to the recordings, then you can go through the PDF. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah's life is rather interesting. There are different angles from which a person can study his biography, and it can all serve as a lesson. You know, presently we are going through this pandemic. If you are looking for solace, then Ibn Hajar rahimahullah also lived through a few plagues, and he also lost some of his children during different pandemics. Likewise, he was an orphan. He lived through a civil war. Someone stole all his wealth. In spite of all these odds against him and all these various hardships that he had to face, he still excelled. So these are different angles through which we can study him. But we will mention basic details about him, and thereafter we will focus on his academic career. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah was born in the year 773 Hijri. There are no difference of opinion with regards to the year of his birth. Now it's very important when you're going into Ḥadīth and fiqh, it is necessary to know in which era a particular scholar lived in, so that we can understand his background. Always remember that we must learn about the area and about the era of a scholar, so that we can put things into context and perspective. We can then understand, like for example, what led him to hold a certain view, and then what scholars before him had to say about that issue, how his contemporaries dealt with it, and what those who came after, how they evaluated his opinion, etc. Since Ibn Hajar rahimahullah was a revolutionist, an analyst, a evaluator, a critic, and also a great contributor to the science, it becomes even more important to keep in mind the century in which he lived. So keep it in mind that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah was in the latter part of the 8th century, and he contributed more in the first part of the 9th century. He was in the latter part of the 8th century, and he contributed more in the first part of the 9th century. There are no differences with regards to the year in which he was born. As for his exact date of birth, there are differences. Allama Sakhawi rahimullah claims that he was born on the 22nd of Sha'ban. So you may refer to page 104 of Jawahir wa Durar. Allama Sakhawi rahimullah says, وَأَمَّا مَوْلِدُهُ فَهُوَ فِي الثَّانِي وَالْعِشْرِينَ مِنْ شَعْبَانَ سَنَةَ 73 و700. In Nazm al-Iqyan, Allama Suyuti rahimahullah mentioned that he was born on the 12th of Sha'ban. He said, وُلِدَ فِي ثَانِي عَشَرَ شَعْبَان, so 10 days earlier. In Lahd al-Alhaz, Taqiyuddin al-Makki, he suggested that it was the 13th of Sha'ban. وُلِدَ فِي مِصْرَ ثالث عشرة من شعبان المكرم. So in short, from here you can see that they all agreed on the month, but they only differed on the date. So everybody agreed on the month and the year. That's just which date of that particular month he was born in. The author's name is Ahmad ibn Ali ibn Ahmad ibn Muhammad. Ahmad ibn Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Muhammad ibn Mahmud ibn Ahmad ibn Hajar. If you have the same print of Nuzha an-Naḍar as me, you will notice that Sheikh Nuruddin Itr, he took a shortcut and he mentioned, he did not mention his full lineage, he only mentioned a portion of it. So since his name was Ahmad, he got the title of Shihabuddin. During his time, any person with the name Ahmad would be called Shihabuddin. And those who had the name Muhammad, they would be called Shamsuddin. The nickname that was given to him by his father was Abul Fadl. So he gave him this nickname because it was after the great judge of the time, Abul Fadl al-Uqayli. Later, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah also wrote a book titled Al-Qasd al-Ahmad fi man kunyatuhu Abul Fadl wasmuhu Ahmad. But unfortunately, this book has not been printed and it is no more in circulation. Now the question would arise that why is he known as Ibn Hajar, the son of Hajar, if we just mentioned that his father's name was Ali? So there are three answers to this. Some say that 6 links above him there is a person named Ahmad. So that is his grandfather's grandfather's grandfather. His name was Ahmad and his nickname was Hajar. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is being attributed to him. Others claim that his father's nickname was Hajar. So therefore he has been called Ibn Hajar, taking into consideration the nickname of his father. A third view is that his ancestry goes to Al-Hajar, which is an area in modern day Tunisia. As for being attributed to Asqalānī, this is because his grandparents were from there. Asqalānī is in present day Palestine and it is known as Ashkelon. It is a beautiful coastal village. Due to the occupation of the Crusaders, his grandparents were forced to migrate from there. This was in the year 548 Hijri. In 583 Hijri, Salahuddin Ayyubi rahimahullah reconquered Palestine and the family moved back to their native city to Asqalānī. However, within a very short period of time, in about 6 months to 24 months, Salahuddin Ayyubi rahimahullah realized that he's not going to manage to protect this single city within Palestine. So he feared that the Crusaders could strike at any moment and they can kill all the inhabitants of this area and they can loot all their wealth and they can then occupy their homes. because this is very vulnerable. So that would then also give them a base to now reconquer the rest of Palestine. Therefore, after much discussion and thought, he felt that it's wise and it's in the best interest of everyone to rather demolish the entire city and to encourage the inhabitants to migrate elsewhere. This is what then forced his grandparents to migrate to Egypt. And hence, even though he is famously known as Asqalānī, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah was actually born in Egypt. Looking at his family background, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah's father was a student of Ibn Sayyid al-Nas. So his father was a Hafiz and he was also a qualified Qari. He possessed ijaza in the Qira'atus Sab'ah. He was also a Mufti. And with all that, he also excelled in poetry. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentions about him in his book إنباء الغمر بأبناء العمر وكان موصوفا بالعقل والمعرفة والديانة والأمانة ومكارم الأخلاق ومحبة الصالحين والمبالغة في تعظيمهم ومن محفوظاته الحاوي وله استدراك على الأذكار للنووي فيه مباحث حسنة. So you can see he's mentioning that he was an intelligent person, he was very pious, trustworthy, he had noble character, he loved the pious and he would go out of his way to honor them. Probably that was the reason that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed him with such noble offspring. He also memorized the entire Hawi and he added on to the book Al-Adhkar of Imam Nawawi rahimahullah. So he says that there's some beautiful chapters which he wrote. And he says that senior scholars would honor him and praise him and respect him. As for his grandfather, he was a businessman but would attend various study circles. His grandfather's brother was the senior mufti of Iskandariya, Alexandria, and he was also a researcher. And you know, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentions that one of his special qualities that he was very good in quoting. The elder brother of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah passed away before Ibn Hajar rahimahullah was born. So his brother was a scholar too, but he passed away when he was still very young. And because of his demise, his father then became very heartbroken and shattered. فَحَزِنَ الْوَالِدُ عَلَيْهِ جِدًّا. One day he went to a sheikh who was known for his kashf. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would unveil for him that which was not apparent, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would divinely apprise him of many things which others would not know. وكانت مكاشفاته قد كثرت حتى صارت في حد التواتر. Everybody knew him that this is a person of kashf. So this sheikh gave his father the glad tidings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless him with another son who will have a long life. He then told him, يخرج من ظهرك عالم يملأ الأرض علما. Your son will be such a scholar that will propagate knowledge around the world. This became the reality, isn't it? And right up until today, people are benefiting from the knowledge of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah in different parts of the world in form of his publications. His sister too excelled in ilm. On page 114 here of Al-Jawahir, all the names of her teachers are mentioned. She had ijazah from scholars of so many different places, from Mecca, from Medina, from Damascus, from Aleppo, Tunisia, Egypt, Lebanon, etc. On page 115 it is written وَمَاتَ أَبُوهَا وَهِيَ صَغِيرَةٌ فنشأت نشأة حسنة وتعلمت الخط وحفظت الكثير من القرآن وأكثرت من مطالعة الكتب ومهرت في ذلك جدا بحيث كان يظن من يراها تقرأ من الكتاب أنها تحفظه لجودة استخراجها. That her father passed away when she was still young, But she had a noble upbringing. She learned how to write, she memorized most of the Quran, and she would read lots of books. She would capture so much from her reading that when people heard her quoting from a book, when people heard her reading a book, they would think that she knew it by heart. Now, as a side note here to slightly digress, this shows that it was the practice of females in the past to memorize the Quran. Today, many people feel that a female should not memorize due to her chores, etc. So we ask them, does that mean that men do not have chores? Others then feel that because she will not manage to revise for a few days every month, so she should rather not memorize. So we say that there are so many males who do not revise for months on end. So rather than making these flimsy excuses, we should consider the benefits of a female memorizing. She can then recite whilst cooking, whilst breastfeeding, and if you're saying she has so many chores, then whilst doing these chores, she could recite the Quran. Nevertheless, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah praised his sister by saying, كانت قارئة كاتبة أعجوبة في الذكاء وهي أمي بعد أمي. She was proficient in reciting the Quran. She would read and write, and she had an amazing memory and outstanding intelligence. He then says, وَهِيَ أُمِّي بَعْدَ أُمِّي. She is my mother, or she is my mother after my real mother. So he said this because his mother passed away when he was so young. And then his sister brought him up. His father also passed away when he was only 4 years old. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah was an orphan, and his main teacher with whom he spent 10 years, Allama Iraqi rahimahullah, he was also an orphan. From a young age, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah was blessed with an outstanding memory. He memorized the entire Surah Maryam in just one day. He would pick up something, he would read it once, and the second time he would just take a glance, and it would be firmly embedded within his memory. As a young boy, he memorized lots of books. Before he could even reach the age of puberty, he already knew Al-Hawi al-Saghir and Umdatul Ahkam of by heart. Because he knew all these in the year 785 Hijri, when he was hardly even 12 years old. And by this age, he also knew the entire Quran of by heart. And it was in this year that he led Taraweeh prayers in the Haram. According to the Shawafi, it is allowed for a non-baligh child to lead the prayer. It was also on this trip at the age of 12 that he heard most of Sahih al-Bukhari. However, once he returned from Mecca, he slowly started to lose interest in ilm. Hardly few months passed, and وفتر عزمه عن الاشتغال من أجل أنه لم يكن من يحثه. He lost interest in learning, and there was no one to encourage him and spur him on. So we can see that company and environment plays such an important role. It's so important to maintain the correct company. But since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destined that he will become a great scholar, he returned back to learning at the age of 17. He first specialized in history. He literally read every possible book that he could get his hands on. Although his focus at this stage was history, he also heard most of Sahih al-Bukhari from Najmuddin ibn Razin. After excelling in history, he turned his attention to adab and poetry. This was at the tender age of 19. He quickly mastered these fields and memorized so much poetry that if someone had to quote even just one stanza, he would easily point out whether that person is stealing someone else's poem or whether it is an original which he came up with, which that person made up on his own. At the age of 20, he began to take interest in Ḥadīth And by the age of 23, he dedicated himself fully and became totally engrossed in Ḥadīth. فأخذ عن مشايخ ذلك العصر وقد بقي منهم بقايا وواصل الغدو والرواح إلى المشايخ بالبواكر والعشايا. He began taking from the remaining scholars of that time. He spent his mornings and evenings circumambulating the circles of scholars. He then went in the company of Hafiz Abdul Rahim al-Iraqi, who we will call Alama Iraqi rahimahullah, and he spent 10 years with him. This is a great lesson how scholars of the past would remain glued with one teacher. They studied under so many teachers, but then dedicated themselves to one teacher. During this period, most of his studies revolved around ulumul hadith, exactly what we will be studying, and specifically around the book ulumul hadith of Ibn Salah rahimahullah, known as Muqaddama Ibn Salah, and books which revolve around it. So his teacher Alama Iraqi wrote the Alfiyah and the commentary of the Alfiyah. He also wrote his Nukat at-Taqyid wal-Idah. Alama Iraqi rahimahullah also gave him permission to teach these books. وأذن له في تدريس الألفية وشرحها والنكت على ابن الصلاح وسائر كتب الحديث وعلومه وإفادتها. Alama Iraqi rahimahullah was the first to give him a formal ijaza in علوم الحديث, وهو أول من أذن له في التدريس في علوم الحديث, وكان إذنه له على ما قرأت بخط صاحب الترجمة في سنة 97. So in the year 797, Alama Iraqi rahimahullah gave him ijaza to teach. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah also read other books too. Alama Iraqi rahimahullah وأكثر رضي الله عنه من التردد إلى العراقي المذكور فقرأ عليه غير ما تقدم من الكتب الكبار والأجزاء القصار الكثير وحمل عنه من أماليه جملة مستكثرة واستملى عليه بعضها. So he read quite a bit too. Alama Iraqi rahimahullah, whether it was books which were in a few volumes, whether it was just small books, he read all of these too. Alama Iraqi rahimahullah. Now here bear in mind that his memory was amazing and his retentive skills were unmatched. So he could easily master these books in a few months, but he did not lose patience and he remained committed to this teacher. Scholars of the past, they had this practice of reading books multiple times. There are so many examples of scholars reading a single book more than once. For example, Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, he read Al-Wajiz 400 times. Can you imagine? 400 times. This here comes in Al-Minhal as-Sawi. For us, we find it difficult to even complete a kitab the first time. So Sheikh Awama, he stresses on this a lot. He often says that have patience with a book. Moving on, there is a list of all the texts which he read to different teachers. You can see what a long list it is, how many pages it covers. All the history and the Ḥadīth which he read when he was young, they all came to his benefit now. So although Alama Sakhawi rahimahullah said earlier that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah immersed himself fully in Arabic, he clarifies here on page 128 that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah did keep his link with other subjects. For example, he read Al-Minhaj to Ulama Ibn Nasir rahimahullah, and he also kept a very close contact with him. He also stayed close to Alama Bulqini rahimahullah, and he got ijaza for issuing fatwa from him. So in our context, we say he became a mufti under him. And he also studied under Ibn Mulaqqin rahimahullah and others. This proves to us that scholars of the past, they were particular of studying hadith and fiqh together. In Athar al-Hadith Sharif, Sheikh Awama, he emphasizes this heavily. He brings so many statements of scholars of the past who all echoed the same sentiment, al-hadithu madillatun illa lil fuqaha. We do not have barakah in time like them. So if we cannot become proficient in both, in hadith and in fiqh, then at least we should know our limits. If we only study hadith, we should know that we cannot issue a fiqhi ruling. And if we only spend time in hadith, then if someone comes and asks us the status of a narration, then we should refer that person to someone who is knowledgeable, if we to someone who is knowledgeable in hadith. And also if we want to quote a narration, we should ask someone who specialized in a hadith. From page 129, his sanad in fiqh is mentioned. Then his sanad in usul al-fiqh and even his sanad in nahwa is quoted. All these show the importance of taking knowledge from shuyukh. On the one hand, he had a good memory, and with that, he also had the talent of reading exceptionally fast. So he could have just sat in libraries and read hundreds of books like, Albani. However, he made it a point to sit at the feet of scholars who also took their knowledge from scholars, who in turn also took from teachers all the way up. On page 137, his teacher's prayer for him is quoted. Allama Iraqi rahmallah made the following dua for him: زاده الله علما وفهما ووقارا وحلما وسلمه حضرا وسفرا وجمع له الخيرات زمرا. The practice of past scholars was that they would make it a point to make dua for their students. Allama Ishaq ibn Rahuya rahmallah, he would say that hardly ever a night passes except that I pray for those who came to learn from me, from my students, and for those from whom I got knowledge from those who I studied under my teachers. So this here, Allama al-Bayhaqi rahmallah mentions it in his Madkhal. Those of you who are teachers, you should take note of this. Inculcate the habit of making dua for your students, because those du'as are readily accepted. In a worst case, it is du'a'ul ghaib lil ghaib. So the time is up. Those of you who want to leave, you may leave and listen to the recordings. We'll just carry on a little bit so that we can, there's so much to discuss on Ibn Hajar rahimullah. We are trying to put the entire ocean in a cup, or rather in a spoon. And therefore, I will just continue a little bit longer. With regards to his teacher, Allama As-Sakhawi rahimahullah then mentions the names of other teachers of his. Thereafter, on page 140, my favorite passage comes, which I like to quote a lot. وَاجْتَمَعَ لَهُ مِنَ الشُّيُوخِ الَّذِينَ يُشَارَ إِلَيْهِمْ ويعول في حل المشكلات عليهم ما لم يجتمع لأحد من أهل عصره، لأن كل واحد منهم كان متبحرا ورأسا في فنه الذي اشتهر به لا يلحق فيه. He had the opportunity of seeking knowledge from the most advanced scholars of each field. Let us see the experts from whom he had the opportunity to take from. So Allama Bulqini rahimahullah was known for his excellent memory and vast knowledge. Imam Ibn al-Mulaqqin rahimahullah, he was a prolific author. Allama Iraqi rahimahullah was strong in ulum al-hadith. Allama Haythami rahimahullah was known to have memorized thousands of ahadith by heart, and he could easily recall anyone at any moment. Allama al-Majd al-Shirazi rahimahullah, he was the prominent linguistic. Allama al-Ghumari rahimahullah and Ibn Hisham were both unmatched in Arabic grammar. Allama al-Tanuhi rahimahullah was gifted in the science of qira'ah, and he had one of the shortest asanid in qira'ah. Hafiz ibn Jama'ah rahmallah, he was talented in so many different fields that he could say, أنا أقرأ في 15 علما لا يعلم علماء عصري أسماءها. I have strong understanding in 15 sciences which the scholars, leave alone the laymen, the scholars of my time do not even know the names of these sciences. So these were the most distinguished and highly educated scholars of their time. They were the cream of the crop. But what is more amazing is that these scholars who were the greatest and most learned in their particular fields, each one independently realized the hidden talent of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah in that same subject. So those who were the most proficient would revert back to Ibn Hajar rahimahullah if they needed an explanation on anything. وهم مع ذلك في غاية التبجيل لصاحب الترجمة والتكريم والتحرز عن مخاطبته بغير تعظيم بل ربما راجعوه للتفهيم. So if the greatest Nahwi is asking him, it means that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah excelled in Nahwa. If the greatest in Hadith is asking him, it can only be if Ibn Hajar rahimahullah himself was a master. If the leading Mufti is inquiring from him, then it means that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah definitely excelled in fiqh. So that essentially means that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah excelled in each science, so to such an extent that he individually could compete with the experts. Bear in mind that he did not just confine himself to these scholars. Rather, he studied under numerous other scholars as well. He had 573 male teachers and 55 female teachers. He wrote a book entitled Al-Majma' al-Mu'assas li-Mu'jam al-Mufahras. It's printed by Dar al-Ma'rifah and Mu'assasat al-Risala, wherein he gathers all their names. Now here one point to mention is that women during that time were not commercialized. So there was an atmosphere of modesty. Sheikh Akram Nadwi wrote Al-Muhaddithat, which features 8,000 profiles of females who excelled in Hadith. In fact, one transmission of Sahih al-Bukhari comes via Karima al-Marwaziyya, who lived between 365 Hijri to 463. Remember what I told you about knowing the eras? So many students got the ijazah of hadith from her, from Karima al-Marwaziyya. Likewise, many students of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah also studied under his wife. However, in today's times, because of the great level of immodesty and the widespread promiscuity, it will not be correct for a male to study under a female, or for a female to deliver public lectures in which males also attend. So it's not permissible for a female to come on a radio station or to post a video on YouTube or even on Instagram, a short clip on Instagram in which her voice becomes public. Nevertheless, going back to what we were talking about, so needless to say, to get from all of these teachers, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah had to leave his hometown and travel to benefit from all these great teachers. And this was how he spent his life. He spent his life either traveling to shuyukh or staying at home immersed in books. He says, وَإِذَا الدِّيَارُ تَنَكَّرَتْ سَافَرْتُ فِي طَلَبِ الْمَعَارِفِ هَاجِرُ الدِّيَارِ وَإِذَا أَتَمُّ فَمُؤْنِسِي كُتُبِي فَلَا أَنْفَكُّ فِي الْحَالَيْنِ مِنْ أَسْفَارِ. A list of all the places that he traveled to is mentioned. You can go through that. One interesting thing is that whenever he traveled, he would make it a point to jot down all the benefits that he got on that particular trip. For example, when he went to Iskandariya, he wrote ad-Durar al-Mudiyya min Fawaid Iskandariya. So this was the practice of many scholars. Even today, Mufti Taqi Uthmani, he also writes a lot about his travels. On page 151, it is mentioned that when he went to Yemen, the boat capsized and his books sank. Or you can also say sunk. There's both riwayat in the English language. So he lost all his wealth and he also lost his books. This was his prized possession, his books. He had to spend some days at a nearby island trying to retrieve whatever he could from his books. So amongst others, some of the books that he lost were the Atraf of Al-Mizzi rahimahullah, the Atraf of Al-Mukhtara, the Atraf of Musnad Ahmad, and the Tartib of Musnad al-Tayalisi. His observation and remarks about this are very thought-provoking. He says that a friend came to him to visit him, and he began to show that friend all his books. وَيَتَعَجَّبُ مِنْ كَثْرَةِ مَا فِيهَا بِخَطِّهِ. So his friend was like, wow, you have so many books, plus they all have your handwriting. When Ibn Hajar rahmallah was reflecting on how all his books got lost, he recalled this incident, and thereafter he concluded, وَالظَّاهِرُ أَنَّ غَرْقَهَا كَانَ مِنْ إِصَابَتِهِ فَلِلَّهِ الْأَمْرُ. So there's a great lesson in this for those who like to post all their bounties on social media. Already over time, there is so much to discuss on the life of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. I am sure that you will agree that there is so much enjoyment in discussing the lives of the pious. It is so inspirational. In Hilyat al-Awliya, Abu Nu'aym rahimahullah, he quotes what he sent to Sufyan ibn Uyayna, that Sufyan ibn Uyayna said, عند ذكر الصالحين تنزل الرحمة. That when mention is made of the pious, then the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descend. As we are going through the lesson, an abundance of blessings, tranquility and mercy was descending. Therefore, we should not think that this is just a pastime. In the previous lesson, we spoke about the importance of sitting with respect. Our pious predecessors would sit with respect when even the names of the pious were taken. Ibn al-Muflih al-Hanbali rahimahullah, he mentions in his Kitab al-Furu', and Alama Dhahabi rahimahullah also mentions in Tadhkiratul Huffaz that Abu Zur'a said, كنت عند أحمد بن حنبل فذكر إبراهيم بن طهمان وكان متكئا من علة فجلس وقال لا ينبغي أن يذكر الصالحون فيتكئون. He says that I was with Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, the name of Ibrahim ibn Tahman was taken. So although Imam Ahmad rahimahullah was lying down, and that too he had a valid excuse, it was due to his illness, he immediately sat up and said, it is not appropriate that the names of the pious are even taken whilst we are lying down. With that, we will conclude this lesson. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka